She screamed, "You're fired," while I calmly pulled out paperwork that made her face go completely white. What was written there? Getting recruited by a CEO is pretty cool. Getting recruited with a handshake deal worth 30% of the company? That's life-changing stuff right there. The whole thing started when I wasn't even looking for a new job. Sometimes the best opportunities find you when you're minding your own business. This CEO tracked me down through mutual contacts, said he'd heard about my work, and wanted to meet for coffee. Coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation about business strategy, market gaps, and why most companies fail to scale properly. Here's what caught my attention immediately. This guy wasn't just throwing around buzzwords or trying to impress me with fancy office tours. He laid out real numbers, actual challenges, and specific problems that needed solving. The company was growing fast, maybe too fast, and he needed someone who could handle the pressure without falling apart when things got messy. But here's where it gets interesting. During our second meeting, he made an offer that sounded almost too good to be true. Not just a salary or some vague promise of future equity, he wanted to give me 30% ownership of the company right from the start. Most people would have said yes immediately and signed whatever paper he put in front of them. Well, I'm not most people. I negotiated hard, really hard. Why? Because when someone offers you something that valuable without much pushback, you better make sure you understand exactly what you're getting into. We went back and forth on terms, responsibilities, decision-making power, and what would happen if things went south. The negotiation process told me more about his character and the company's real situation than any interview ever could. After weeks of legal back and forth, we finally shook hands on the deal. 30% ownership, significant input on major decisions, and a role that would basically make me the second in command of everything operations related. At my age, becoming a business owner with that much stake in a growing company felt surreal. Most people spend decades climbing corporate ladders just to get a taste of real ownership. The first few months were exactly what you'd expect from a fast-growing business, organized chaos with a side of controlled panic. But I loved every minute of it. Building systems, hiring the right people, fixing problems that had been ignored for too long. The team responded well to having someone who could make decisions quickly and stick to them. My reputation with the employees got established pretty much from day one. I made it clear that I wasn't there to play politics or waste time on meaningless meetings. When people brought me problems, I either solved them immediately or gave them the tools to solve them themselves. When they had good ideas, I listened and implemented the ones that made sense. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The company culture felt solid, revenue was trending upward, and everyone seemed happy with the direction we were heading. But then something started changing around the office, and it wasn't what any of us expected. Things were looking amazing. Our revenue doubled in less than 2 years after I joined. The numbers were climbing fast, and everyone felt like they were part of something special. We had momentum, energy, and most importantly, results that spoke for themselves. But then something shifted. The CEO's wife started showing up at the office more often. At first, it seemed innocent enough. She'd pop in for lunch meetings or brief conversations. Nobody thought much of it. After all, spouses visit workplaces all the time, right? Well, her visits became longer, more frequent, and she began sitting in on meetings that had nothing to do with her. The atmosphere in our office, which had been relaxed and productive, started feeling different. People whispered in hallways. The energy changed from excitement to caution. Then came the new rules. Suddenly, we had restrictions on everything from office hours to project decisions. Nobody explained where these policies came from or why we needed them. One day we're operating one way. The next day there's a memo about changes that made zero sense for our business model. Several longtime employees started asking questions. These weren't troublemakers or complainers. These were solid people who'd been with the company since the early days. They'd helped build what we had. When they raised concerns about the sudden management changes, they were brushed off or told to adapt to new company standards. That's when people started leaving. Good people, valuable people. Employees who knew our systems inside and out began updating their resumes and having quiet conversations about other opportunities. The exodus wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was steady and concerning. What bothered me most wasn't just that people were leaving, it was why they were leaving. Exit interviews revealed the same story over and over again. The work environment felt unpredictable. Decisions were being made without input from department heads. Communication had become confusing and inconsistent. And the weird part is, our financial success was masking these problems. Revenue kept growing, so from the outside, everything looked perfect. But internally, We were bleeding talent and losing the culture that had made us successful in the first place. I watched colleagues who'd been excited about coming to work start checking out mentally. Meetings that used to spark creative discussions became tense and formal. People stopped offering innovative ideas because they weren't sure how leadership would react. The CEO seemed overwhelmed trying to balance his business responsibilities with managing these new dynamics. He'd built a great company, but now he was caught between maintaining what worked and accommodating changes that weren't working. I kept thinking this phase would pass. Maybe it was just growing pains or temporary adjustments. Companies go through transitions, and successful ones adapt and come out stronger. But as weeks turned into months, the pattern became clearer. This wasn't about adaptation or growth. Someone was actively reshaping our company culture, and their vision didn't align with what had made us successful. The real challenge was still coming, though, because soon those changes would target me directly. Things were about to get much worse. The CEO's wife wasn't content just hanging around the office anymore. She wanted control. Real control. Within weeks, she started overruling department heads on major decisions. Marketing campaigns that took weeks to develop, scrapped because she didn't like the color scheme. Hiring choices that went through proper interviews and background checks, reversed because the candidate didn't feel right to her. The weirdest part, she had zero official title or authority. Yet somehow, people were following her orders like she was running the show. Fear does strange things to employees, especially when their boss's spouse is involved. Then came our first real clash. We needed to hire 3 new developers to handle our growing client base. I'd already interviewed candidates, checked references, and found perfect fits. These weren't random picks either. They were experienced professionals who could start immediately and knew our tech stack inside out. She walked into my office one Tuesday morning and announced we weren't hiring anyone, just like that. No explanation, no discussion, no consideration for the fact that we were already behind on 2 major projects. "We can't afford it," she said, sitting in the chair across from my desk like she owned the place. I pulled up our financial reports on my laptop screen. Actually, we budgeted for this 6 months ago. Revenue is up 40% from last quarter. We're in great shape financially. Her face went cold. "I don't think you understand who makes decisions around here." That's when I realized what everyone else had been whispering about in the break room. The rumors weren't just office gossip. She genuinely believed she could override anyone, including a 30% owner of the company. Our arguments became a regular show for the entire office. She'd storm into meetings I was leading, contradict my recommendations in front of clients, and question every decision I made. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But here's where things get interesting. I wasn't backing down. When she tried to cancel a contract with our biggest vendor, a relationship that took me 2 years to build, I refused to sign the termination papers. When she wanted to fire our top salesperson for attitude problems, I blocked it through proper HR channels. Let's not forget the comedy in all this. She kept treating me like just another employee she could intimidate. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, "Lady, I literally own 30% of this business. This isn't how any of this works." The final straw came when she started telling people I was difficult to work with and not a team player. Word got back to me that she was building a case for what exactly? Well, that became crystal clear soon enough. What she didn't realize was that contracts and ownership stakes aren't just pieces of paper. They have teeth, legal teeth, and she was about to find out exactly how sharp those teeth could be when someone tried to bite off more than they could chew. Walking into the office that Tuesday morning felt different. The air was thick with tension, and people weren't making eye contact. Something was brewing, but I had no idea the storm was about to hit me directly. My assistant knocked on my door around 10 a.m. with the strangest expression I'd ever seen. "HR wants to see you," she whispered. Like right now, the way she said it made my stomach drop. You know that feeling when you're about to hear something that'll change everything? Well, here we go. The HR director looked uncomfortable when I walked in. She kept shuffling papers and avoiding my gaze. Finally, she cleared her throat and said the words I'll never forget. "We're going to have to let you go, effective immediately." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "Let me go? You mean fire me?" She nodded nervously. That's when the pieces clicked together like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. The CEO was out of town at a conference. His wife had been unusually quiet for the past week, and now suddenly I'm being terminated? The math wasn't hard to figure out. She'd waited for him to leave, then made her move. Pretty clever timing, if you ask me. But here's where things got interesting. The HR director started explaining severance packages and final paychecks, and I had to stop her. "Hold up," I said. "Do you realize I own 30% of this company?" The confusion on her face was priceless. She clearly hadn't thought this through. Well, turns out she wasn't the only one who forgot about that little detail. Within an hour, I got calls saying my computer access was being revoked and my company credit cards were being canceled. They were treating me like some regular employee who got caught stealing office supplies. The weird part is how fast corporate machinery moves when someone wants you gone. It was already trying to lock me out of systems. Security was asking about my key card. The whole process felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. Then reality kicked in for everyone involved. You can't just fire a major shareholder like you're letting go of a part-time intern. My contract wasn't some basic employment agreement you could tear up and toss in the trash. This was a legal partnership with voting rights, profit sharing, and protection clauses that would make any lawyer's head spin. By lunch, the HR director was making very different phone calls. Legal departments were getting involved. Suddenly, everyone remembered that ownership stakes come with certain protections that employment at will laws can't touch. The funniest part? They couldn't even change the locks on my office because technically I owned part of the building too. Makes sense, right? But the real fireworks were just getting started. What happened next would prove that sometimes the best defense isn't playing nice or staying quiet. When someone tries to fire you and you're just an employee, you pack your desk and leave. When you own 30% of the company, well, that's a completely different game. I didn't waste time feeling sorry for myself. The CEO's wife had made her move while her husband was out of town, thinking she could just steamroll over me like any regular worker. Big mistake. I immediately called for an emergency board meeting. Not because I was angry, though I definitely was, but because I had the legal right to do it. Here's what most people don't understand about business ownership. When you own a significant chunk of a company, you're not just someone who shows up for a paycheck. You're a decision maker. Every major choice about the company's direction, including personnel decisions that affect ownership, requires shareholder approval. The CEO's wife had forgotten this tiny detail. The board meeting was awkward, to put it mildly. She sat there looking confused while I calmly explained that as a 30% owner, I had voting rights on any decision involving my position. You can't fire an owner the same way you fire someone from accounting. Makes sense, right? Then there's the contract I'd negotiated when I first joined. Smart lawyers had built-in protections specifically for situations like this. The document clearly stated that my ownership stake was tied to my role in the company, and any attempt to remove me without cause would trigger buyout clauses that would cost them millions. The legal reality hit fast. In most U.S. states, minority shareholders, that's anyone who owns less than 51%, can still block unfair treatment if their contracts protect them. My 30% stake wasn't just a number on paper, it was real power. When the CEO returned from his trip, he walked into a legal nightmare. His wife had essentially tried to force the company to buy out a major shareholder without following proper procedures. The potential lawsuit alone would have been devastating, not to mention the financial hit from triggering my buyout clause. But here's the weird part, I didn't want to destroy the company. I'd helped build it. The revenue had doubled since I'd joined, and we had something special going. The CEO realized this too. He also realized that choosing his wife's ego over the company's stability was a losing bet. The resolution was swift. He sided with the business, not the drama. My position was secure, my access was restored, and the company avoided a legal disaster that could have tanked everything we'd worked for. Ownership isn't just about the money you make when things go well. It's about having a seat at the table when things go wrong. That 30% stake I'd negotiated wasn't just compensation, it was protection. And when someone tried to push me out, those ownership papers became the most valuable documents I'd ever signed. Sometimes the best defense against workplace politics isn't playing the game better. It's owning enough of the board to change the rules entirely.